Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Silva podcast with your host, Michelle De Silva, a podcast that focuses on creating healing and awareness. In this two-part episode, Michelle interviews Dorian Johnson, who is the co-author of the award-winning memoir titled The View from Above, one father's memoir of grief guided to grace, which is the story of the search for his oldest son, Bayland, who passed away in a hiking accident back in 2017. Stay tuned and listen to his wonderful insight into grief.
And welcome to the Silva podcast with me as your host, Michelle De Silva. In today's episode, we will be discussing grief. All of us at some point in our lives are going to experience some sort of grief. And if we are experiencing grief for the first time, this can be quite a daunting experience when it is someone that has meant so much to you. So to help me discuss this topic is Dorian Johnson, who is a motivational speaker, a digital marketing and content creator. He's an award-winning author and influencer. He is the co-author of the award-winning memoir titled The View from Above, which is one father's memoir of grief guided to grace, which is the story of the search of his oldest son, Bayland, who passed away in a hiking accident back in 2017. Along with the memorial hike, he took friends a year of the day of Bayland's passing. So welcome, Dorian.
It's an honor to be here. I was so grateful that you asked me to do this podcast after our great conversation we initially had.
And this is obviously not something that is initially easy to discuss. So I do appreciate you coming on today. But after our first initial conversation, I found what you shared with me so intriguing. And that's why I definitely wanted to share your insightful own experience and the thought processes that you have now related to grief. So would you mind kind of starting from where you, in the beginning, from where you want to start your journey?
Yeah. So my story begins almost 7 years ago. And my oldest son, he had hundreds of miles on his boots, from hiking and lots of experience in being able to go in the mountains. We live in Idaho, southeastern Idaho, in the United States, and there was one canyon that he wanted to go explore. And this was just before Memorial Day weekend back in 2017. It was Thursday is the day that he left. And when he left, I had the opportunity to just have a really good conversation with him just before, let him know that I loved him with all of my heart and that he had absolutely, I could have asked for him to become who he had become more than what he had. He's 19 years old when he passed away. So he left about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I didn't think anything about it. And as it was getting later in the day, I get a text from him, which kind of surprised me because, up in the mountains, I didn't think he was going to have any reception or anything. But I get a text from him that he had made it to the top of the mountain simply by saying, "This is a beast of a hike, but talk about a view." And I mean, now I look at it and I think, it's a little insightful. I'm sure he had no idea what was about to happen in that. But it was about 20 minutes after 5. And so I kept reaching out to him saying, is it a long hike? Is it steep? Is it whatever? I didn't hear anything back from him. And it started getting dark and it was getting late. And I didn't hear anything. I tried calling, I tried texting more and that, and nothing. Well, he also had he had gotten a pup not long before, just a few weeks before, and his little pup was about 10 weeks old at that time. We don't know what part she played meaning like if she got too close to the river. But there's a river that runs through this canyon, and there's a big campground there. There's a trail that takes you all the way to the top of the mountain. In this little canyon, the trail is on the east side, and there's no trail on the west. Flip it. On the west, there's a trail. On the east, there's no trail. And as you go down that side, or as you look at it, I've talked to people who have, hunted and hiked that area. They're like, that is rough on that side. But it gets really steep. As you get closer to the river, the nasty willows, there's no trail along it. The river cuts right into the mountain. So, and he didn't have his hiking boots with him, so we don't know what happened. So and the river was flood stage. It was raging that year because of overflowing runoff. There was so much snow that year. So I don't get any response. And I go in town to ask some of his friends if they had seen him, heard from him, went to and talked to an officer, a police officer, just to say, I'm going up the canyon. I don't know what the situation is. Hopefully it's nothing. But if something happens, how do I get a hold of anybody? Because I'm not going to have any, reception up there. So he follows me up there. And when we get up there, we find the car that he had borrowed. It was a Isuzu Trooper that had problems with the starter. So I didn't know whether that was part of it, but the keys were locked inside. And so, we're looking around and we're, hollering and all of that. And I'm asking the officer, so what do we do? He's like, well, here's what I'm going to do. I just called in the search and rescue. So, and my first thought was, wait a second. Why would we do that? That's crazy. All we're doing, I bet you he has his hammock. He may have, if he locked the keys in, he may have just pulled his hammock out. It would be cold, yeah. But I bet he's just asleep somewhere. And so he's like, you can go up the mountain and yell and all of that if you want. I can't stop you. Well, I did. I climbed up that mountain at like 2:30 in the morning, and it is pitch black. And I didn't realize how high I had climbed then, but it's steep and it is brutal. Well, the officer comes up and gets me and says, the search and rescue are here. Let's make a plan. And they start asking these crazy questions like, what's his mental state? And I'm like, what kind of a question is that? Everybody knows him. Mm-hmm. But he was in such a good place. I mean, he wasn't before. We had struggled, his mom and I had been divorced about 5 years up to that point. And we struggled with the things I should be doing, shouldn't be doing, can't, all of that fun stuff. And he finally came to the realization that I have my stuff that I have to deal with. His mom has to deal with her stuff. He has to deal with his own stuff. And so he pushed everybody's away, said, I love everybody. So he was in such a good place. And so the search started before light. And I just am standing there thinking, what can I even do? Mm-hmm. What can I even do to start helping? And I'm asking, they're just like, nope, stay back here because we don't want you to start stepping all over. If we find tracks, we don't want to wonder if they're yours or his or whatever. So I step back, and there's so many people who show up. I'm so grateful for all of the people who were able to help with that. But they hiked up to the top of the mountain. They started looking around. I mean, they went down other places where different roads and trails would have led up to where he would have been hiking in that. They called in a helicopter, life flight. And I was like, did they find him? Did they find something? And they said, no, they're going to fly across the side of the mountain and look down in the trees and different places where we can't see from here. That's when I realized how real this was getting. And the struggle that I had, and it's something I want to talk to different, organizations about, is I'm standing there by myself no support, watching this helicopter go back and forth across the hill, across this mountain. And I can't help myself, and I just start sobbing. This can't be real. This cannot be happening. This doesn't happen. And so they take, a half hour or so, which they did a lot of searching in that half hour. And they, would hover over and look down in, but they came back and landed, and the pilot came over, and I'd already introduced myself, let him know that I was the dad, and he came over and was letting, the authorities know that they got another call, and they had to go and do a rescue. It couldn't just be, they're looking and stuff. So he looked at me dead in the eye and apologized profusely and just said, "I'm so sorry. We've got to go take care of this." I understand. I get it. But deep down inside, the question for me was, why not my kid? Why not my child? Why isn't he important? And that's a valid question, but it wasn't realistic. So the search goes on, and I am, standing there, helpless, hopeless. There's a few people who I know. I mean, I know the majority of people who are there because I've, lived in the area for years, and it's surprising the individuals who do show up and are part of the search and rescue, because you look at them, and I looked at them and said, you know what, they have a little bit of a rough exterior, but as you watch what they're doing, there's a sense of compassion and caring that they showed that I never would have saw any other way. That's why I'm so grateful for them, and that. And I've made connections with certain people that every single time I see them, I shake their hand and look them in the eye, and just, we have a conversation, and it's not, thank you every single time, but it's an unsaid thank you for helping me in my, So as the day goes on, and that, we're checking everything. There's the way that the canyon is. There's a road, and it's a ATV road where people ride 4-wheelers and side by sides, and that you can go up into a different valley and down, and it would cut off at least 5 miles if he hiked out. And they asked about that. They said, what way would he go? Straight down the road? So that if there was, if somebody, came by, they would stop and ask him if he needed a ride. I said, he wouldn't ask. He wouldn't ask for a ride. He would walk the whole way out. And so we made a plan to go over there and check and see what was going on, see if there was any sign of him at all. Because he knew that area real well, just up and down, and he hunted that area. Nothing. Well, they had made a phone call to the International Air Guard to see about the possibility of bringing in a infrared helicopter. And it was thousands of dollars if they decided to do it. And they said, okay, we'll get back to you. Well, it was almost immediately that they called back and said, we need to do some training. So if you give us about 6 hours of before you need us to be there, we'll do it at no charge. And this was out of Ogden, Utah, which is, like, by driving, it's probably an hour and a half away. But so when the person who they were talking to, on our side, said, start the clock. And so they brought in another helicopter with infrared. They came in at 9, or they were there before 9. Anyway, so I had gone away from the scene because I had to clear my head. I had to get away for just a minute. And people think, how could you do that? You have to. You have to step away because you get so engrossed. You get so deep in it. And as I'm walking around and that, there were, like I say, there were certain people who I knew, I'd known for years. There was one guy in particular. He would just look at me. He would watch me, watch my body language and that. And every time he would see me, he would look at me and say, "Nope, don't you go there. Don't you go anywhere. You're right here with me. You stay with me." And that support, even though I knew they were business as usual with all of this, it was different for them. So as I watched this humongous helicopter, when it took off, dirt was everywhere. And so we had a good laugh about that because we're having to get bugs and dirt and stuff out of our teeth but it was so amazing to sit and watch that helicopter go back and forth and the range that it took was miles because it went up and down the canyon because we were thinking maybe he had gone down a little bit further and went down and we didn't know. I hadn't had any sleep. I didn't sleep all Thursday night, Friday morning. So I had been up almost 40 hours and I was at the point where I wasn't functioning very well. And so I just said, I have got to go get some sleep. And the struggle that I had was I hadn't eaten much and I hadn't, drank much and I hadn't sat down much and I hadn't done, and everybody's like, you have to take care of yourself. You have to eat and drink and I just thought to myself, you know what? If I know Baden's up there and he's hungry, I can't. I have such a hard time thinking that it's okay for me to eat if he can't, or drink if he can't, or if he's scared or hurt or whatever. How can I rest? So finally I drive to the house and I go up and I go to sleep and I fall immediately asleep. And all I remember is waking up thinking, I'm waking up to the nightmare. I'm not. That was the only reprieve I had, was to be able to sleep and get away from it. But I don't remember anything. And so before I had left the night before, the sheriff, I'd known him for years. He walked up to me and said, okay, you know him better than anybody. What would he do if he'd walked out of here? If he's somewhere else? If he's safe? Last night, what would he have done? Would he have come up to you, if he got home and found you and stuff? I said, no, he would have snuck in, and we were making a bedroom for him downstairs. We were staying with my parents and making a bedroom down in the basement where he had his own entrance and it was going to be amazing. He was so excited about it. So he had a bed down there and I said he would have just snuck in and went to sleep because he knew that he would have, he wouldn't have been in trouble. He would have said, this is what happened. And we could have said, okay, everything's okay. Everything's great. The reason I bring this up is first thing in the morning, I get up and I don't hear anybody. There's some other people who were staying there because they were concerned about what was happening. And I go downstairs to see, just to keep hope. And as I walk into where his room is, I see a body in the bed. And I know I notice their back is turned to me. And all of a sudden I have this exhilaration of, oh my gosh, and I almost go jump on him. And I realize that he's a lot bigger and he doesn't have as much hair as Baden does. And I realize it's somebody in the family who I will never understand why he went and slept there. But I couldn't get out of that room fast enough before I let out just this blood-curdling groan of hurt, like reaching inside of me and just tearing my guts out. And so I drive back up. And on the way up, I remember just saying, at one point, Baden, just please show us where you are. Please. That's all I ask. Because I had realized that's the second long, cold night he would have been out there. And after I said that, I just said, Baden, I hope you know that I love you with all of my heart. And this wave of love and just, I can't even describe it, comes rushing through me. And the words come to my mind, there's no question. And it comes back through me. I hope you know that I love you with all of my heart. So I am just trying to stay on the road because I'm just sobbing. Get up there to the where the camp is, and anything, any sign, anything. They said no. And I had left before the infrared helicopter was finished. And I kind of needed this little thing. They said, but we can tell you a little funny story. I'm like, I need something. So where the road goes up into the other valley, they said, why don't you go check that area up there? And they were seeing deer. They were seeing all of these animals and stuff. Then all of a sudden they see, we have heat. There is somebody camping right there. And so the search and rescue had a side-by-side, and there's people sitting in there and hanging on the sides, and they're going up the road so fast, driving up to where this camp is, and they pull upon this young couple, whether or not they were supposed to be there, or anybody else knew that they were there. They weren't married. They pull up and they're like, are you Dorian Johnson? They're like, no. It's like, you son of a gun. And they're just like, I think we scared them to death because they thought they were in trouble. So they come down, and I got a good chuckle out of that because I'm just like, oops, maybe, no, they didn't want anybody to know. So I go down in town again, clear my head, get something to drink, something to eat. And on my way back up, I'm going up the road, and I'm almost to where the campground is. And I see the sheriff's truck come down, and I pass him, and I'm going up the road, and we flip around, so we change places. And I get out. And he gets out. And he says, I need you to come back up. We found him. We found him in the river. Sorry. The A Suburban is coming around the corner, and they slow down. And my oldest daughter gets out of the passenger side. And I've had a struggle with the relationship I've had with my kids because of different things and people thinking that I'm not a good dad and all of that stuff, which is bullshit. But at that moment, my oldest daughter comes running at me, screaming, "Dad, he's gone. He's gone." And she throws her arms around me and just hugs me. I'm like, what is going on? And the sheriff says, we found him in the river about 200 or 300 yards up from where we had stopped looking. He's like, you need to come up now, but you cannot drive. And so somebody gets in my truck with me. I'm in the passenger side. And everybody heads back up. And I'm just like, hurry, drive faster, get up there. And as soon as we get up there, he's looking for a place to park. I'm like, screw this, let me out. I get out and I go up there and I see, I had told my ex-wife, about 4:00 the day before what was going on. All of my kids were there. And well, my youngest son was staying with somebody and my youngest daughter wasn't there. Anyway, I see my ex-wife laying on the ground just screaming and crying and people are hugging and that. And I get out and I say, what is going on? You've got to tell me. And they said that they had brought cadaver dogs in, the very best in Utah. But one of the search and rescue people who had been working tirelessly yesterday, he went up a little ways and it was looking in the river. And all of a sudden he sees just barely poking out of the water. He sees toes. And the river had receded about a couple inches overnight. And so they said, we found him, clear up here. Stay here. We don't want you there. We don't want you going up. And so what had happened, we don't know how. We don't know if his pup got too close to the water. We don't know if, because it was so steep, we don't know if he had fallen in. We don't know if he thought to himself, I'm just going to take one big jump and then I'll pull myself out or whatever. But he had a backpack on and he had a shotgun because he was hunting turkeys at the same time and that. And they had to push him down, and because his big backpack and the gun had gotten him stuck between two big rocks. And there's nothing that prepares you for the deafening silence that lets you know that your son or daughter has passed away. The interesting part is that with that deafening silence comes peace. And that may sound crazy, but the peace comes because the helplessness and the hopelessness is over. And you can have closure at that point. You know what you're going to have to deal with going forward, but it's not the uncertainty of anything. That's the beginning. And so I had so many of his friends, people who I didn't know, who were parents of his friends, who came forward and said, I want to share with you what your son did for my son or daughter. How he was the only one sometimes who would just sit and listen. How my son or daughter knew that they had a friend named Bayland. How there was no question about whether or not, if there was a party or whatever, that the parents felt safe enough if he was there to let their son or daughter go.
Mm.
And
Just really quickly, Dorian, but at the time when you were going through such a difficult time, when people were sharing these thoughts and feelings with you with regards to Baden, did that not make it more difficult?
my answer is no. And the reason I say that is because I mean, there was a lot of people who would say, I don't know where you're at, so I don't want to take you back to a place, or I don't want you to start crying because of all of these things. I realized that the most important part of what they're telling me is the love that they have for my son. And to share these experiences, I realized how much of an influence he actually did have that he never talked about. And so it was, for me, it was healing to say, you know what, that is my son. I'm so grateful for the example he set. Now, I can tell you that I'm so grateful that it wasn't a different scenario that he went up there for, if that makes sense.
Mm.
For me, and to be able to have that last conversation to say, you know what, I don't care. No matter what up to this point, you couldn't have made me more proud of who you become. I think that the hardest part is that I had come to the point knowing that he was an adult. He could make his own decisions. There's nothing I could do or say. I could guilt him. I could, make it so that he felt bad about his decisions and stuff, but that's not what I did up to that point anyway. He stayed with me through high school, and so I saw him be able to grow into who he is. I can tell you that that's one of the most difficult parts of anyone's healing journey, is to start talking about their son or their daughter as if they're still around, as if they're going to walk through the door, as if, all of these things are happening in that. And maybe that's part of the blessing. Maybe that's part of my healing process, because I kept wondering why should I write a book? What's the importance of it? I didn't know. And why should I share life lessons that I learned going up this hike? What's the importance of that? But what I did find is that there have been people who reached out, and in the book, we're taking the hike, and it's a beast. But the things that I'm going through in my mind about, what am I learning in that, the search, different anecdotes about what makes Baden who he is, and that what I've had is people reach back and say, I cannot talk about my story. I don't know how you can. But thank you for telling your story, because I can work through mine listening to yours. And I've had people say, I finally understood now why I have been so angry about certain things, because I watch as either somebody in the story, in the search, where somebody has like set my question or my concern aside and not addressed it initially. And all of a sudden they can relive when all of a sudden somebody has done that. And they're like, wait a second, my question is valid. This and this and this. And so all of a sudden they say they can work through their issues, their problems, their struggles, and that. I'm honored that this story allows for people to do that, because it doesn't happen like that all the time. So the long answer is I'm will always be honored to be known as Balin's dad.
And this just because obviously I would imagine anger is one of the strong emotions that anybody who's lost someone goes through. And so through your own grief, did you go through the anger journey yourself?
Yes, it wasn't about the fact that Balin passed away. It was more the fact that there was not the support that I wanted or needed in going through my grief. It was the fact that people told me, well, just get back up, just keep
Because
going.
you mentioned something earlier on when you said that there was one part of the story where you just kind of started crying, and you mentioned that you wanted to
Uh,
speak to organizations or mention something. So was there actually something missing when that whole experience you were going through? Because I remember you mentioning something like that.
okay, yeah, let's go back to that part because
Yeah.
okay, so my I'll say this, my relationship with family wasn't great. It isn't great now, just because I'm that's people don't understand what you go through, and when you they don't understand why you do certain things, and I don't understand why I don't do certain things or say certain things, or when I'm like when it seems like I'm just wandering around, in a house or something like that, and all of a sudden I'm just, I mean, it's not a random house, but people are watching saying, why can't you just pick yourself back up? The disassociation you have, saying the loss of reality in this whole entire thing is such a struggle. So going at that moment when I see the life flight and I ask somebody, why is a life flight here? And no one's really giving me an answer except, oh, they're just going to go and hover above. So as I'm standing there with no support, and as law enforcement is talking to the pilots of the helicopter, and I walk over so I can know what's going on, and I introduce myself. I'm Baden's dad. And they're like, oh, nice meeting you and stuff. To be in such a bubble, to try to make sense of anything at that point. When I want to talk to search and rescue teams, when I want to talk to like first responders, EMTs, law enforcement, even people in emergency rooms and that, it's not that you have to bring the parent in and get emotional about all of it, because I know that emotion has to be masked or pushed away for a minute so you can take care of things. But to have someone look at the parent and say, I'm not going anywhere. And to say, because for me, what I'm like, why in the world is the search and rescue here? Why do we have so many people? We're going to find him. We're going to wake him up in his hammock. He can, I'll take him home and all of that stuff. If somebody would have walked up and said, I can only imagine the being overwhelmed by this many people looking for your son. It's protocol. We have to do it as a just in case. We're hoping that everybody gets to go home and get 2 or 3 more hours of sleep before going to work or whatever. But just in case, the search and rescue are here. This is what we do. This is what we train for all of the time. That would have put my mind at ease in a heartbeat. Okay. And then if they looked at me and at the same time and said, and they're going to be asking some questions, some pretty uncomfortable questions about, mental health and his hiking ability and but it's not meant to do anything else but assess the situation, assess where he's at mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, all of it. If I were standing there again watching the helicopter, and as people are walking by and they're talking about different things, and it's not the fact that they should be talking about the search the whole entire time, but as I hear somebody laughing down at one of the traders, and I'm just like, guys, stay focused and stuff. Even if somebody walks by, stops, puts your hand on my shoulder, they don't have to wrap their arm around me, but just put your hand on my shoulder, gives me a punch in the arm or whatever, I know they're saying, we're here. This is all for you and your son. And so when I say I want to talk to these organizations, I want them to understand, not in a degrading way or anything, but just say, these are some things you just take into consideration. Make eye contact. Make eye contact. Don't avoid it. Don't just say, okay, what's next? What's next? It's the fact of, let me know you are here and the purpose you are here. That's a big deal.
And it's like understanding that at that moment, your reality is not a reality anymore.
Yes,
and showing some, sensitivity with regard to the situation.
Yes. And so that sensitivity is also like when the sheriff walks up and says, okay, you know him better than we do. What do you think he would do? Would he walk down the main street or the main road, or would he go over here and stuff like that? All of a sudden, I become part of the decision-making process because I'm providing information and stuff. That takes the helplessness and the hopelessness away for a minute. And I think, okay, I can help. I can't be out wandering around and adding footprints and stuff, but it's be cognizant of the room, be cognizant of how people are responding in that, and take into consideration if they have family there supporting them. Take into consideration, how they're acting. I mean, if they're pacing around, if they're picking up rocks and throwing them hard and stuff like that, just walk over there and just say, what is it? What can I do? I'm not going anywhere. None of us are. And I think that not only to let me know the purpose of them being there, but the fact that we're doing everything we possibly can for the very best outcome. Okay. Now, if you don't mind me sharing one of the biggest lessons that I learned during this search, and I think I shared this with you, and it was, oh my gosh. So on Friday morning, after the search got started, it was probably about 10:30 in the morning, and I hadn't had anything, to eat, to drink, or whatever, and so I needed to get away, from all the commotion. So I went in town, and again, it's the Friday before Memorial Day weekend, and the grocery store is packed with people, and everybody's laughing and joking and having fun, and they're certain that of what their experience for that weekend is going to be. And they're seeing friends and, hey, we'll meet you up there. And, oh, good to see you and that. I grabbed a little something. I saw some people I hadn't seen in years, and they knew Bayland. And they're like, hey, how are things? And this and that. And I'm trying to keep a straight face and not say, this is what's going on and stuff. For some reason, I don't want to share. Because honestly, the worst part for me was feeling embarrassed that I couldn't even do anything to help find my son. Okay. So I get in, I'd start driving. And I have a friend who we've had lots of good conversations about so many different things. Meaning he would, if he felt like I needed to rethink something differently, to ask, different questions and things like that. So always supportive of what was going on. And my family didn't know what to do. They were not, when I say not supportive, they just didn't know, sorry to say it this way, but get their ass up there and just at least be there, figure out what's going on, right? So I texted him and I said, hey, Ben went hiking yesterday, hasn't come home, so we're looking for him. I just want to let you know, and I'll keep you updated. And I get a text back. And I had a conversation with him after, and he said, I did not want to send that one. That's not what I wanted to say. I wanted to say, I'm on my way. I'm not going anywhere. We're going to find him. We're going to figure this out. Okay? The text that he sent was, at Friday morning, when we first start the search, let go of the outcome, and you will be taken care of. I threw my phone. I was so mad. I thought, you son of a, how dare you? How can you think that I could look at every option at this point and consider them? No way in hell. So I'm going up there and I'm thinking to myself, we're going to find him, and I'm just going to prove to him, just prove him wrong, right? And I'm just like, oh my gosh. What do you mean let go of the outcome? The most beautiful part of that was that's exactly what I needed to hear, because the next morning when I say, Baden, please show us where you are, that's the only way I could have accepted the outcome. That's the only way I could have said, whatever it is, just let's put closure to this. And that has been a huge lesson in my life when I've gone forward with certain things and saying, oh, if this happens, it's going to be the end of the world. Oh, if this doesn't happen, it's going to be the end of the world. I revert back to that and say, I got to let go of the outcome because I'm not in control, you know?
Mm. And that's that whole acceptance. And this is why I wanted you on, because your perspective now on your whole process and the way you view things is very different to what somebody could remain with these feelings after experiencing grief, like still remaining with the anger, the
Yes.
frustration, the
Yep.
sadness. So you look at it in a different way. So do you want to share that with us?
Yeah. And the reason that I love how you introduce it that way, because I've had to look at things different. I was able to speak at his funeral, and I don't know how I did, but I was still in that space of it wasn't acceptance. It was of, okay, this is what it is, and I'm surviving right now. But still being in that bubble of peace, and because we had closure and all of that. So I talked about how we love Baden because he loved us first. And I, used a scripture in the Bible. Basically, it says, we love Christ because he loved us first. So similar to looking at Baden, and he was compassionate and kind and accepting and tolerant. And so as I'm explaining all of this, in the days that followed, something came to me and it said, these are all virtues. I'm like, okay, well, and I can tell you that your mind works so differently. And when I say it's broken, there's some things about a broken mind that allows light in to consider things that you'd never ever would have considered before.
Mm.
Because there's not structure there anymore. Because you can't figure out, the whys and all of that. So as I started looking at that, I'm like, okay, well, great. They're virtues. And, I started doing a little studying on this and saying, okay, well, what's the difference between love and the word love or the word compassion or kindness and virtue? And what I found was that the word virtue in English, it means excellence of mind or excellence of character. Okay, depending on whether it's intellectual virtue or moral virtue. It's what we do in the very best way. Okay. But if we follow it back to the Greek word, the Greek definition, it's a manifestation of power. And I love that definition because what it says is there's more to it when I'm being kind than just the act, okay, or the thought. And the reason I say that is because that kindness, that compassion isn't always from us, but it is through us. And so as we look at this and say, okay, kindness is a manifestation of power. Being patient is a manifestation of power. So I went and visited with one of my friends who's a counselor. I didn't talk to her or talk through my stuff with her because she had lost her daughter at 19. And I did not want her to have to relive all of her stuff while I'm talking about Balin and that. But I talked to her and I went back to the Bible and picked out, or there's a story about a woman who has an issue of blood. She's had it for 12 years. And she knew that if she just touched the hem of Christ's cloak, that she would be healed. And so as I read that, it says that she touches his robe, and all of a sudden, immediately, she knows that she's healed. And he stops, and there's lots and lots of people around. And he looks around and looks at her straight in the eye and says, "Who touched me?" And she's like, "Uh-oh, I just got caught." And everybody else is like, everybody touched you." He said, "Mm-mm." And he's looking straight at her because he wants her to say it was me, because he doesn't want any question about what just happened. And he wants to remind her of the relationship he has with her. And she says, "It was me." He says, "I perceive that virtue has gone out from me." And I'm thinking to myself, what virtue is going to help heal an issue of blood, a physical ailment? What? Okay, I'm not taking it away that he's the Son of God. I'm saying, what virtue in my finite mind? So I let that sit for a day or two, and I come back to it, and I'm just like, okay, fine. What is it? And the answer that comes to me is, well, it really doesn't matter, does it? It was for her. But what I came to the realization is that when we are kind and we are compassionate, and when we have integrity, when we have honesty, when we find joy in different things, there's something about it that changes not only our perspective, but our behavior, right? So I'm talking to this counselor, and I said, I share with her this. And I said, how would it change your conversations with the people you counsel with if virtue is in the room, courage and bravery and integrity and gratitude? And she's like, it would change the whole dynamic of the conversation, change everything. I said, how? And she said, because fear and doubt and shame and guilt wouldn't be there. And they could be authentic and vulnerable. I'm like, oh my gosh. So my mind starts expanding, and she's like, time out. Mm-hmm. Put a visual together. I'm not going to follow you if you don't. Okay. So what I did is I went and I started looking at the core virtues, not values. because we can put value on different things. We can value things differently than other people do. And I put together a table of virtues, and I didn't know anything about chemistry. I really don't know a lot about it now. But I took the periodic table of elements, I got rid of all the elements, and I filled in based on the 10 different virtues, which are wisdom and justice and fortitude and self-control, which some people would call it temperance. But there's love, and there's positive attitude and hard work and integrity and gratitude and humility. And there's different elements of each one of those. Like if we look at wisdom and we say, well, that's just that guy who has a long beard and lives in a cave, and we go ask, what's the purpose of life? What does it really mean? But if we look at it and we say, it's about balance, it's about creativity, it's about your intuition, it's about your vision, but it's also that logic and reason that helps you understand why. The moral aspect of things is different than the intellectual virtue. It speaks different languages because the intellectual virtue is the thought of your mind, and the moral virtue is the thought of your heart. So as we talk here, if you are straightforward and you're based on intellectual virtue, you say, well, this is the way it is. Okay, I'm not going to disagree on the facts. But if I look at you and I say, Michelle, you hurt my feelings. If you're intellectually virtue-based, which is logic and reason, that's what it is. I'm putting it out there on the table. And I say, but you hurt my feelings. If you don't understand the moral aspect of it, I'm going to explain this to you, but I want you to understand the why behind it. And I'm going to explain it in a kind, compassionate way, not sugarcoat it, not be all soft. It's going to be here. We're always going to be parallel we're never going to connect. So if I explain something to you and say, here's what it is, and here's the why behind it, here's why I don't want you to go out and play in the road. The logic and the reason says you're going to get smashed. But I love you, and I don't want anything to happen to you. And all of a sudden, if they feel the why behind that, so different. So to create this, I've had lots of conversations with people, and they're like, do you understand chemistry? No, I don't. But to put together a virtue formula, which helps us to understand what it really means, that our identity is that nucleus inside that atom. And that doesn't change. Our identity doesn't change. That nucleus inside of an atom never looks outside of itself to identify as something else other than what it really is. The only way that it can do something different is if protons or neutrons are taken away or added to it. But it becomes something completely different. It's not the same. So if we look at this and we say, let's create a virtue formula that allows us to be authentic and vulnerable and scare the hell out of us. If we set it up so that we're authentic and vulnerable and protect that nucleus, our identity, by adding other virtue elements on the outside of that, bravery, patience, kindness, but also grace for ourselves, balance, honesty, dedication, meekness, joy, all of that, we become what they call a noble gas, which means that it's contained in itself. It's stable. It doesn't need to look outside of itself. It doesn't need to look to another atom or another element to connect with it to say, I don't care whether it's stable or not. I don't care whether we explode something. It doesn't matter. We can be ourselves completely. And by doing that, as I come and have a conversation with you, I can remain myself, and so can you. And we have these beautiful conversations. Let me share one last part of this, which is, to me, is one of the biggest aspects of it, is because somebody was look at me and say, give me an example. And I say, okay, well, let's talk about patience. I'm not patient. And I say, oh, good. Then you'll understand this, because we're going to go to the store and we're going to get behind the oldest, slowest person. And they start smiling because they're thinking, oh boy. But what's going to happen is we're going to be patient on purpose. What does that mean? I'll tell you what it means. As soon as that person looks behind them, whether they're in a little cart or whether they're walking slow or whatever, they're going to apologize for being old and slow. And we're going to say, it doesn't matter. You take your time. And not only are we going to be patient, but we can feel it right here that we're going to be kind and compassionate and accepting and tolerant. We're going to be understanding. We're going to have all of these things that wake up inside of us that are all virtue elements of different virtues. And we're going to say, we're right here in this moment, just being. And it's going to be an amazing experience for us, because all of a sudden the oxytocin kicks in, the serotonin, the endorphins, serotonin, all of this kicks in, and nothing else matters at that moment. There's no anxiety, there's no depression, there's no anger, there's no wanting to go out for our addiction. There's nothing there. And the beauty of it is we get all of that. The person we're being patient with gets all of that. And anyone else around us who is watching, they get the same thing in the amount that they have the capacity to receive. Okay? And so we look at them and we say, what are they going to do? Somebody will say, they'll use the phrase, they're going to pay it forward. No, they're not. There's no such thing as paying forward in this. It's, I'm going to go and be me, and I'm going to find ways and reasons to do the same thing because I love how I feel. And this is authentic. This is me. That's what I want to do. That's who I want to be. Okay. So we look at that, and I say, as we define ourselves by something that's inside of us that can never be taken away, that can never be questioned, instead of our last name, instead of I'm an athlete, instead of I'm a mom or I'm a dad or these other labels, these other, whatever we want to call them, I love looking at somebody and say, I'm Dorian. And you say, hi, I'm Michelle. We define ourselves by our first name. But I love explaining, and I don't do this very often, like right up front, that's kind of weird. But I say, let me give you an example. My name is Dorian. D is for dignity, and O is for originality, and R is for respect, I is for individuality, A is for authenticity, N is for nobility. That is who I am. And so as I go out into the world, before I leave the house, I can say, remember who you are. If there are situations where somebody they can be mean or they can be rude or whatever, I can look at the situation and say, am I being respectful of them? Am I being respectful to myself? And go through the day, and that's who I am. Then I can come home and say, is that who I was today? Do I need to work on this tomorrow? But that's who I am, and I can always be authentic to that. And so the beauty of such a traumatic experience is learning about what virtue is and how it helps us not only heal, but helps us define ourselves. So we don't have to be angry. We don't have to go through all of this stuff. Now, do we still go through it because we're human? Absolutely. Do I? Yep.
So what sort of examples would you give for those who are going through those difficult emotions and still going through the grief process? How can you Yeah. So what sort of
Okay.
examples could you provide for somebody of just changing and adding a virtue to that?
Okay. That is a phenomenal question. And there's so much to it, but I'm going to surprise you. And I'm going to make it simple. Okay. Because so many times we focus on the experience, the losing of a child, getting a divorce, losing a job, a health issue, whatever. That's the experience. That's not what defines us. But what I love to do is I love to look at them and say, so that's the experience. What do you feel like you have lost? Like for me, I lost reality. I lost a sense of purpose, a sense of connection, and all of these things. And if there's a sense of loss of reality, there are certain virtues that go along with that that can help us heal. What is it that that you need to reconnect with reality, with a connection, with all of that? And so if we look at reality, it's being aware, it's awareness, it's the validity of this is real. This is a serious thing. So awareness, patience with yourself, grace,